The following year, in 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act. This time they boldly proclaimed, "We are taxing you." It is a direct tax, and it is meant to generate funds to pay for the cost of the 7 Years' War. It is not a tax to regulate trade or support the government. This tax was applied to the sale of all paper items, such as newspapers, almanacs, pamphlets, broadsides, legal documents, and even dice and playing cards. Whenever those items sold, a stamp was placed on them as proof that the tax had been paid. Parliament justified the tax by saying that they had fought a costly war in the colonies against the French army and their Indian allies, and had won the land between the Appalachians and the Mississippi River on behalf of the colonists. And because we had benefited from all of this, we should pay for our part of the cost expended by the empire. Furthermore, they reasoned that since they were leaving several thousand British troops here to continue to protect us from the Indians and that benefited us, they had every right to tax us. Additionally, they said that since we were 3,000 miles away and that it took 8 to 10 weeks to get information back and forth to us, it was not feasible for us to have input or representation in the legislative matters concerning the American colonies. They felt that Parliament was quite able to represent the colonies, since we were all Englishmen. Of course, most Americans disagreed with them. We didn't think that they fought the war primarily for our benefit. We felt that they had fought the war to enlarge the British Empire, and that we were just a part of that imperial increase. The fact of the matter was that we had been fighting the Indians and the French for over 100 years on our own, with little help or concern from Parliament during that time. Yes, there was some involvement during that time, which we were thankful for, but there was little of it. Our observation was that the mother country was primarily interested in the natural sources that we shipped to them, so that they could convert those raw materials into manufactured goods, such things as tobacco, flour, rice, dried fish, indigo, timber for boats, beaver pelts, grain, rice, indigo, livestock, iron ore, copper, whale products, etc., is what we shipped them and that they produced. We also felt that Parliament could not accurately represent us, and that representation was one of the reasons why all of the colonies had colonial legislatures. We asked the question, since Parliament was in England and weren't living in the colonies, how could they possibly know the problems we have? Problems with poor roads and limited communication over an expanse of 3,000 miles that stretched from Georgia in the south to Massachusetts in the north. And along those 3,000 miles, they also faced on hostile Indian lands. How could they sympathize with our import and export difficulties between England and the colonies when we were separated by 3,000 miles? Then there were the ongoing issues between the 13 colonies. Disputes over boundary lines, different laws, different currencies and exchange rates, and import and export trade issues between the colonies themselves. In reality, they knew very little about what it was like to live here in the colonies, about what we faced on a daily basis. And we asked ourselves, how could they possibly talk with our voice and adequately represent us? And since they couldn't properly represent us, we had no voice in Parliament, and no taxes should be assessed against us because we were not represented. For over 100 years, we taxed ourselves, both directly for the support of the government and indirectly to regulate imports and exports. We were no strangers to taxing ourselves and supporting our government over that period of time. But this was quite a different situation. We didn't have a voice, and we didn't think we should pay those taxes. It came down to Parliament deciding what it felt was best for us in all and any matters. And we would stand up against that. We strongly felt that taxation without representation was tyranny. With the King and Parliament running roughshod over our rights, with the proclamation of 1763 keeping us from settling west of the Appalachians in the Ohio River Valley, with the imposition of hidden tax on sugar and then their heavy hand of the Stamp Act, many colonists all felt powerless to do anything. But not all of us. In response to the encroachments, Sam Adams organized a small group of men in August of 1765 at the Green Dragon Tavern in Boston, Massachusetts, that eventually included John Hancock, John Adams, James Otis, Paul Revere, and Joseph Warren. They felt that they were not being heard by the King and Parliament, but they wanted to organize public protests and put pressure on the local officials that were sympathetic to the Crown. So they formed the Sons of Liberty to advance the rights of the colonists and to fight taxation without representation. They would summon similar-minded Bostonians to meet in a public meeting place or tavern or under a liberty tree or liberty pole to further their efforts. Other groups, loosely associated with the Sons of Liberty, but adopting the same name, sprouted up in New York, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Newport, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Maryland, and Virginia. They participated in public demonstrations, threats, and were not above tarring and feathering to punish and humiliate those government officials that sought to enforce the acts of Parliament. Early on in Boston, they burnt an image of Andrew Oliver, a local stamp distributor, in effigy in the streets. And when he did not resign, they vandalized and ransacked his home and set his office building on fire. Even when Oliver did resign, they almost destroyed the whole house of his close associate and cousin, Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson. Those acts resulted in many other distributors resigning in fear of reprisals.